Hello and warm welcome to Straight from the Heart, a podcast by Pragyan Advisory. I'm Vivek Tiwari, your host. In the last several months, we've realized the importance of having deep and focused conversations like never before. So, taking a leaf from the lesson learned, we have termed this new series as Conversations. As part of Conversations, today we have someone who is a global consultant, prolific author, business and organizational coach, entrepreneur, chairman of a global transformation company called News Navigations, headquartered in Switzerland. Dear listeners, please welcome Aviad Goz. Aviad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vivek. It's my pleasure.
All right. So, Aviad, the overall theme for our discussion today is navigation needed by leaders in a post COVID world. So, what I'll do is I'll straight away jump into my first question for you. And that is, in space of leadership, you work with CEOs, corporate leaders, also with artists, defense professionals, religious leaders. So, with your kind of deep experience in leadership, what are your top three, four broad observations around leadership in the last, let's say, 15 to 18 months?
Right. So, Vivek, first of all, I think it is very obvious that leadership during these last months was tested as never before. Never before young leaders or even elder leaders had to face such a crisis in such a magnitude and try to lead through it in a completely unknown scenario with very little visibility. So, first, I think leadership everywhere, even political, but really definitely in companies and organizations, was tested. And I think what came out of this test, first thing, is you could see the leaders that emerge as real leaders. You could see the people that had titles but were not real leaders. And you could even see fake leaders that got to their position somehow. So I think it was a time where what is real surfaced out and also what is not real. So that was the first thing. The second thing I think that became obvious, which was before, but this was very emphasized in this time, is that leaders first need to lead themselves before they can lead other people. I'll give an example. There was and still is a lot of fear in people in face of the crisis and what is coming. So even in that aspect, leaders had to overcome their own fear before they could offer inspiration or leadership or help to others. So this idea of you need first to lead yourself, overcome your own limits, and only then can you offer it to others became very obvious. And maybe the third thing which I can mention is that in this crisis, it became very clear for various reasons that the human aspect of leadership is really significant because every leader that kept on being mainly operational manager and did not rise to the level of looking into the human factor and helping the people, engaging people, helping people overcome situations, these people discovered that the leadership that they offer is not enough. So I would say the third thing is that the human factor in leadership uh, has become more obvious in terms of the need for it beyond, numbers, operations, and execution. So that will be my answer to that.
Okay, so just for the summary for all our listeners, it's the first observation is real, not real, and fake leaders. So that perhaps it so happened that last 15-18 months created an environment where these three largely broad categories became very clear. The second is the ability of leaders to lead themselves, to overcome their own fears. I think that's the second thing that you said. And the third is the human aspect. Beyond just managing business from an operational standpoint, it's about really the human aspect which became important. So those are the three things. Thank you, Aviat, for sharing that. All right, so I'll move on to my next question, and it's more in the area of, because it's sort of, I would say, we have heard this phrase very often, once in a lifetime kind of challenging situation for the humankind. So what are some of the challenges that you think were experienced by the leaders during the pandemic?
Okay. So during the pandemic, we also delivered a lot of around the globe webinars in which we also asked leaders what are their main challenges. So
Mhm.
we surveyed these challenges and we got answers from hundreds of leaders around the world, and they related to few things. One thing most of them related to was the challenge of engaging people in the current situation. Because working from home, not being in the office, not meeting people, even onboarding people that you never met, the ability to engage them into your organization and the culture of your organization was very challenging for a lot of leaders. I think the second thing a lot of them said is that the ability to keep focus, even with changing strategies, because everyone realized they need to be very adaptable. So strategies beyond tactics had to be changed quite frequently. So to keep people focused and aligned to that was a serious challenge.
Mhm.
And I would say that because the need to respond to a lot of changes and fast changes, there was a great challenge in responding fast and yet together. Meaning, it's one thing to respond fast and adapt to a changing situation, it's another to take your whole team or management team with you. So this idea of responding fast and keeping everyone with you was very challenging for a lot of people. And I would say generally, because again, most leaders never met such a crisis, maybe except some who served in the army, the need to be resilient, adaptable, flexible, and keep your people with you, I think was very challenging for most.
Mm. Okay, so engaging people, being focused, and being aligned, responding fast, and in a manner where everybody is together, and being resilient and flexible. Those are some of the things that you figured out, stood out as the major challenges. Okay, I
Yes,
really like, yeah.
maybe I would just add to it again the human factor, because
Hmm.
I think for a lot of leaders, this aspect of looking after people, helping them in extreme situations, keeping hope, many leaders never needed that before.
Mm,
And in order to provide this to the leaders had to find it in themselves.
mm,
I think for many leaders, this was pretty
mm,
challenging.
mm. I couldn't have agreed more to you. In fact, uh, as part of Pragyan Advisory, we've been interacting with a lot of leaders and leadership teams. And I think one of the things, as you rightly pointed out, to us also, it came out like finding your inner core, your inner source of strength, was very important for leaders, because there was so much sort of impermanence all around, and many a times the people within the organization were looking up to them for providing a sense of, I would say, permanence in some shape and form, and that stood out as one of the leading challenges that we also figured out. So thank you, Aviat, for sharing that. I'll come to now your favorite topic, for which you have devoted years and decades, and also written a lot of books. Also, your last book was around navigation. So, and I'll specifically now ask you the question which is very close to your heart. Uh, how can leaders prepare for effective navigation in the post-COVID world, considering that across the globe, different countries are in different stages of recovery? And I can tell you about India that just a few months back, we had our second wave, and uh, you know, I know that it was really, really very challenging, and in certain situations full of grief. So how do you think leaders can navigate?
Yeah. So you ask, how can they prepare? I don't know if leaders can prepare for navigation,
Mhm,
because I think actually navigating organizations and teams happens now all the time. It's like
mhm,
hands on. So you can't prepare much to a hands on situation. But I think from the observation of the last year and a half, those who managed to navigate well, I think, did few things which we can look at as best practices.
mhm,
So, one, there needs to be an ongoing hand on the pulse, meaning leaders need to daily
mhm,
look at the changes. I know some companies that I work with that created something like a war room, which is a terminology from the army, but it is used for a war situation where you
mhm,
have like a nerve center and information flows in all the time. And there are people that their job is to analyze this data all the time. So the first thing I think is that the leaders needs to be with their hand on the pulse, both in the market, the economy, but also internally inside their organizations. Because as an example, in a lot of companies, we see now a lot of attrition
mhm,
and the level of mobility is very high. And so you can have your team one day and the next week you can have half of your team. So the need to know what's happening and to dive into the details of both what's in the market, customers, but also within your own team and organization is number one. From that, I think leaders need to read the trends, because even in a fast changing world, a, there are trends. And some trends you can even forecast by seeing how different countries responded so far and how they are responding. So it's not fortune telling, but I think
mhm,
leaders need to read trends systematically. And then leaders need to make choices. I think a lot of leaders that I know tried for a long time in the last year and a half to avoid choices or to delay choices. And understandably, because again, the environment is so unexpected. But comes a time that they need to make choices and they cannot delay them anymore. And I think when leaders make now choices and navigate forward to the next phase, they need to keep their messaging very, very clear to their people. We know historically, and it's one of my expertise, that in times of crisis, the first thing people expect from their leaders are clear messages
mhm,
and transparent messages. Meaning,
mhm,
even if the leader doesn't know something, they should say that they do not know. and they should say when do they think they will know. And they should disclose data and not hide it, because a lot of leaders think of the people as children, and it's like a parental act to hide from the children. So people in organizations are not children. And I think one of the things that people who navigate and want to keep good alignment and good focus is very, very clear messaging, transparent messaging, including about what they do not know yet, but might know about later. And I think another thing in navigating now is to keep a good level of authenticity and genuineness. Because I think around the world, a lot of people lost trust in political powers, in governments, in leaders that were not up to the situation. So I think to navigate your team and organization well at this time, you need to instill trust. And the best way to instill trust is by being genuine and transparent. And maybe the last thing in current navigation is none of us has a visibility for a year, 2 or 3 as before. So the navigation becomes much shorter in its span. And companies I work with now look at the strategy on a quarterly basis, deeply on a quarterly basis. But one thing they do not change the direction and the vision, but they do change the strategy and tactics very, very often now to create the next phase and then the next phase. And the last thing I'll say is that the best leaders at this time do it with their people rather than alone and telling their people, because people want to be involved, they want to understand, they want to be part of things, and they want to be in the picture. So I know it was a bit of a long answer, but that's what I would say.
No, but thank you for sharing that. I think there was some quite important elements that you covered. I want to go back and cover with you, because that's something also my personal interest. And while coaching, I've heard some of the sentences around communication and clear and transparent communication. So what I've heard is that in a situation which is termed as crisis, at times leaders take a call of perhaps not releasing all the communication. The reason being that it's still evolving. And if they tell what the situation is right now as interpreted by them, it may create more chaos. And in their own minds, they want to delay it or play it out in a manner where they can manage the chaos. So it's a judgment call that they are taking. And at the same point in time, because of that, they're in a dilemma whether they are being purely authentic. Are they being true? Because somewhere in this whole process, they know that they are not telling the absolute truth. So how to deal with that? That's an interesting point that emerges in coaching, especially in this era of crisis.
I'll share with you my belief. My belief is that the truth eventually always surfaces sooner or later. And I think it's better that you make the truth part of the truth that you know, you think that you know. You better disclose it early. Again, I think that, all type leadership is the knowing all patriarch figure that, has their information, discloses what they want, and expect people to follow. I think we will see, or we are seeing already, we see many changes. I believe we see also change in the type of leadership that is evolving. I think we see a much more participative leadership evolving, and authentic leadership evolving, and humane leadership evolving. I hope it's not only my hopeful thinking, but I see it. I see where people are acting like that. People stay with them, people stick with them, people trust them, and people go with them. And anything else which is trying to delay things or hide things or postpone things or trick, I think people became very sensitive to fake news.
Mm,
People don't believe everything as they
mm,
used to. So I think it has many impacts that we don't see it, but we might see in the future.
mm. Yeah, and I also, particularly I'm trying to remember the points that you shared with us. I think I like that idea because I can relate to it when we are doing work here, with leaders and leadership teams. The direction, being true to your values, being true to the broad direction of growth or whatever, but being quite flexible and adaptable to the strategy and tactics. I think that's something that, yeah.
I have a good analogy for you. It's exactly like our physical body.
Hmm.
We do have a spine that doesn't change and is holding us from within.
Yeah.
But because of this constancy of our spine, it allows a lot of flexibility with our limbs,
Mm,
hands, feet,
mm,
and you cannot have only one aspect. You need both.
yeah. Thank you, Avia. That was a good way to remember. Okay, so there's one question, and I think that's the last one from my side, which I would like to ask you, and that's about what do you think are some of the aspects of leadership that may significantly change because of our experience of last 15-18 months, and what are those aspects that wouldn't change, that would not change, and perhaps the faith has become stronger in those. So the two categories: one that would change because of the experience, and one that would not change, and our belief, our resolve has become far stronger in those aspects of leadership. What would those be?
I think the ones that will not change are the very fundamental things like the need to drive performance
Hmm.
or the need to give clear goals
Hmm.
or the need to drive people to exceed what they did before.
Hmm.
So I think that will stay there because this is like the bread and butter of leadership and needs to be there. If I think about what I believe will change, which is again, no one knows, but I think because of the challenge of engaging people, especially by remote, the style of leadership has to change, as I said earlier, to hold much more the human aspect. When I say the human aspect, I mean leaders now will have to look into people in difficulty and assist them. I even heard leaders saying that they need to help the people in terms of the mental state, or almost mental health. I think leaders will have to be very supportive of helping people go beyond fear, beyond doubt, and so on. So I think that will change. I think, as I said before, leadership will have to be more authentic because, you have a lot of very young people promoted to be leaders,
Hmm.
but their level of resilience and life experience in the face of crisis is is low. So I think people will have to mature significantly in themselves. Now, of course, this cannot happen overnight,
Hmm.
but like companies now and organizations will go through evolution in terms of who is adapting to the new requirements. I think the same will happen with leadership. There will be leaders that will adapt to this ongoing changing scenario, to the need to adapt, to the need to engage people, align them, focus them, be hands-on. And many will not go through this evolution. So, yeah, I think it's time of evolution, and I think we haven't seen a lot of it yet. I would say one last thing.
Yeah.
If most surveys show that 40 to 50% of people post-COVID consider to change their workplace, how can you as a leader make sure that the people that you want to retain are not part of these 40 or 50% that are going to move on? And that will require not just bonuses or $5 more per day. This will require different leadership, which can be engaging, which can be courageous, which can lead the way forward, even through very complex situations. And I think every nation has some figure in the past that could portray this kind of leadership. And I think you have one in India as well.
Yeah, we have, I would say, many that we associate with, like our association when it comes to religious beliefs. It's also about getting inspiration from leaders. We have many, but I know there are few that are globally renowned, and their ability to lead people in crisis or in difficult situation sort of is a hallmark. Yeah.
It is then when your leadership is tested. Every fool can be a leader on a good day.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Uh, you know, I I got thinking when you made that point of 40 to 50% attrition, because what's happening in India right now is there's a you know there are the IT technology product companies which are growing, global companies growing. So there's a certain kind of talent which is getting attracted. Then there are unicorns, uh, or organizations that are about to become unicorns. Then there are organizations which are being started by bright young entrepreneurs, and by virtue of their sheer energy, strategy, need which they have identified, the organizations are getting the second round, third round of funding, and they require a certain kind of talent. So I know for sure, because of my interactions, that definitely there's a certain kind of talent, and I think it's applicable all across, but a little bit more on a certain type of talent where I can clearly see that the ability to hold, retain talent is going to be, and it is still a big challenge. And the impact of losing a great talent is immediately felt uh, by the organization. So it's the causality is so immediate that the organization really suffers a lot. I got thinking when you said that.
Yeah, maybe I'll quote something that is very true in many cases, which is that people join organizations and positions, but people leave their managers or leaders. And I think this is even more true today.
Yeah, yeah. Many years back when I started my career, we used to hear this, and then when we were reporting to different managers, we experienced it. And I'm sure that when I became manager, many would have experienced the same. So I couldn't have agreed more to that, Avia. I think this was a wonderful conversation, as always. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Aviad, for taking time out for this conversation. And I'm sure our listeners will immensely benefit from your views and perspectives, and especially coming in these times when the last 15, 18 months have been really, really challenging and the leadership mettle has been really tested. So thanks a lot for taking time out for this conversation. Appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. See you soon. All the best.
Thank you.